Hi, Madeline.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Give me just a minute. I'm going to join you up on stage.
Perfect.
And I always hit the wrong button, so it always takes me a few minutes because I do it every week and I forget to do it. Forget how to do
No
it.
worries.
All right, there we are. Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How about you? Nice to see you.
Doing good. Nice to see you too. I know we always chat via email, so it's nice to get to see each other face to face.
Yeah, and I feel like we've been living in Florida all week because it's been hot and humid, so we're channeling you.
Yeah, you really are. Yeah, it's been pretty miserable here.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, this is why we don't live in Florida, but San Diego's telling us that something's going on with climate change.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it actually was in the hundreds here. It's usually not that hot, so
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know we're a minute or two early, and I like to. My staff isn't even here yet, so I need to wait for them. So we'll just chat until then. I see Ellen in the audience, and I see Gill. So welcome, ladies. Hi, Anissa. Hi, Sibylla. Nice to
Hi,
see
thank
you
you so
guys
much for
again.
joining.
Hopefully, they'll be joining us on stage. Actually, I'm gonna. Now that I think about it, this is your first time. This is your first time on Fireside, right, Madeline?
Yeah, I honestly have never used it before, so all this is pretty new to me.
Okay, well, it's kind of fun. So you can see that we have a video portion, and you can use your fingers and touch your screen and like stretch out the images so you have a bigger image. So I always like to see the author better because the first time I started doing Fireside, they were tiny little pictures, and I said, "How can anyone see that?" Until somebody clued me in that you can stretch it out and make it bigger, which is
Yeah.
nice.
Definitely. There we go. That works much better. Thank you for that.
Sure. And then we're up on the virtual stage, and you'll see the virtual audience below us. As soon as Amber joins us, we can go ahead and get started because she's going to broadcast live for us. So another perk of Fireside is anybody, you, the audience, us, can broadcast this live on any social media channels, which is really fun.
That
So
is
to
cool.
do that for anybody listening or for Madeline, whoever wants to, you can go to the hamburger button, which is a little circle in the lower left-hand portion of your screen, and you click on that and hit broadcast to the world. There's a little globe icon. Um, and we
Well,
just
that's
may
fun.
go ahead and get started, and then when Amber joins us, she can do all that for us. She may be running a few minutes late, but I like to start pretty much on time. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and when she joins us or other firesiders join us, they can join in as they wish.
Sounds
So
good.
hello and welcome everybody to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm Susan McBeth, your host, and I'm delighted today to be hosting New York Times and international best-selling author Madeline Martin, who is here to talk about her new historical novel, This Beauty, The Librarian Spy, yes, which was just released. Yes, give her a round of applause. It was just released a few weeks ago. So that's very exciting. This is actually part two in a six-part mini-series we're doing, Fall into Reading, which gives you a chance to meet six authors and learn about six books that you may wish to add to your fall reading list. But before I introduce Madeline, I think everybody in our audience so far is pretty much a repeat so they know how the Fireside app works. And as people are getting used to the app, we need to announce less and less about some of the perks and features. But just a reminder that you can invite yourself up on stage anytime to chat with Madeline, to say hello, to ask her a question, or whatever you want to do. That's one of the benefits of Fireside. We're going to have about a 45-minute chat today. It's intended as a conversation, so we hope you will join us. And if you haven't already pre-ordered a copy of her book, The Librarian Spy, you can visit our website, adventuresbythebook.com. And when Amber gets here, she can put that in the fortune cookie in the middle of your screen, adventuresbythebook.com, where you can order a copy. And it'll be shipped directly to you with a signed book plate, not just any book, but a signed book plate. As I previously mentioned, she is a New York Times and international best-selling author of many books, including the one we're going to be talking about today, but also her last historical novel, The Last Bookshop in London. Her new book, The Librarian Spy, is a moving new novel inspired by the true history of American library spies in World War II. I just find that so fascinating. It's hard to believe. And I love this because we always think of book people as nerds, right? But the
Sure.
fact that there were all these nerdy librarians out there doing some really badass things, I can't wait to hear all about it. So we're delighted to have you here today. Welcome, Madeline.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And congratulations on the new book. It's very exciting.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah. So last week we chatted with Sara Ackerman in our first episode, who also wrote a World War II historical novel, and she lives in sunny Hawaii. Now you write a World War II historical novel, and you're joining us from sunny Florida. So I
Yes.
find it kind of interesting. Is there a correlation between the two, that you both live in sunny, bright, cheery places, and you're writing about deep, dark Nazi and wars?
Right. I definitely think it's nice having the sunny sort of reality to offset some of the dark things that we research for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I was sort of half joking because I know you are a history buff, and that you spent your childhood in Germany, which, by the
Yeah.
way, so did I. You were an Army brat. I was an Air Force brat. We'll have to talk about where we were stationed when. You're a lot younger than me, so I'm sure I was there a lot earlier. But can you share a little bit about your experience in Germany and what you remember that? How
Oh,
old were you?
yeah. I remember a lot about it. We were there for three different tours, so we were there for about 12 years total. The first time was when I was around like 1 to like 5 or 6 or so. We were in Darmstadt, which is sort of near Frankfurt. I don't remember as much about that. And then when we went back the second time, I had my 10th birthday there, and we were there for kind of like 5 years or so. And we were in Würzburg, and that one was really cool. Well, I was in middle school, and all I really wanted were skating rinks and malls and being back in the States where you had more than one place to buy your clothes. But in hindsight, I have so many amazing memories of all the different things that I got to do there. And it was neat because we got to live on the economy because they didn't have housing yet. And so we lived in this really small little town called Margitserheim. And it really was just such a beautiful experience. And then when I graduated from high school, this is one of those funny things about being a military brat. I thought that I graduated from high school in Texas, but I apparently was a California resident, even though I hadn't lived there since I was 9. So I ended up going to a private school here in Florida, but I was delayed on my entry because of going late. And I ended up doing some time in Bad Kreuznach with my parents for their third tour as well. So back and forth, I would go there. So
Oh, wow. So sprichst du Deutsch?
ich spreche Sie kleine Deutsch, ja.
Yeah, ich auch. Ein bisschen, nur ein bisschen. So I asked her if she spoke German, and we both speak a little. So my mother
Yeah.
was German, so that's where I come by mine. So, as our listeners know from our programs, I always like to start by getting to know our author a little bit before they became the wild successes they are now, as a New York Times and international best-selling author. So, you talked a bit about your childhood and your time in Germany, but can you talk a bit about your first exposure to books and maybe libraries and writing, and how you got started in that, and if there was somebody that inspired you along the way?
Well, I like to say that I've always been a reader, but my mom will tell you that is not true. Apparently, I fought it kicking and screaming when I was little, and they used to have to pay me a penny a page to read. I don't remember that, but I trust my mom. All I remember is loving books so much, and my favorite books were the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House in the Big Woods series. I must have read that series so many times over. And as much as I always wanted to be Mary, I was definitely, I was definitely Laura. And so for me, libraries were really important because moving all over the world, I am a lot more extroverted and a lot more like I do much better with people now. But when I was younger, I was incredibly and painfully shy. And so librarians were always my first best friends whenever I would go to school because I just would connect with the characters in the books, and that kind of made me feel not so alone every time we would move. So librarians have been special to me for that reason. And as far as writing goes, it's funny. I've written, I think, my whole life. I've always just sort of had stories in my head. back through a lot of like my old student paperwork and stuff like that my mom had sent me. I had a whole bunch of like random chapters that were written here and there. Like there is a hardcover book that I had illustrated when I was like 7 or 8 or something. Is this whole thing about like shipwreck that happens and the girls discover they're mermaids and and all this. So I think
That's
I've always kind of written, but I've been writing for just under 15 years. And before, like, I've been published since 2015, and I at the time was writing full time. I was writing like 6 to 8 books a year, and I was working full time as a business analyst. And for 3 of those years, I was even a single mom of 2 little girls who were very, very active. So I've written about 36 books. And really, it was about, I think my 35th one was the one that hit the New York Times. And it's really been just completely a dream come true because I have worked so hard. Thank you. I've definitely worked very hard to get to this point. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I was going to ask that I ask all authors is kind of I'm amazed how diverse their backgrounds are in terms of what they did previous to writing. So you were an analyst, but 35 books.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the funny thing is, I have people who tell me, oh, you must have done, history or journalism in college. But no, I did a business administration major with minors in economics, political science, and accounting. And for my business analyst job, I was doing SQL code and analyzing all the data and sending out, details of what was going on and suggestions to improve certain processes, that kind of thing. So, yeah, totally different from my writing.
No wonder you became a writer. That sounds incredibly boring.
Oh, right.
But do you,
It could be fascinating. And I got to, when I was running numbers, I got to listen to audiobooks all day. So that was fun. My brain would be working numbers and I would also be enjoying a book at the same time, which is always a win.
but I imagine that you use some of those skills in your stories, the background, or
I don't know. Well, it definitely helps with data. I've had people who have asked me before for information, just stats and things like that, and I'm like, oh, I have this spreadsheet, and so just kind of keeping track of a lot of things. I get to flex my old Excel skills and put them to good use. I wish I could get SQL on my computer because that would definitely make running analysis significantly easier. But c'est la vie.
so you said you've written 35 books, but you started off, correct me if I'm wrong, as a romance writer, right? I mean, you have a whole series. You have the Highland Passions, the Mayfair, Matchmaker of Mayfair, the Borderlands series. So you went
Yes.
from romance to historical novels. Tell me a little bit about your start in romance. And because you're incredibly successful like that, you have a ton of books, but then you switched over to historical fiction. So is this going to be a new regular lane? Or are you going to go back to romance? How did you get started and where are you at now?
So I got started being on maternity leave and reading Outlander. So I don't know if anybody's read Outlander. If you haven't, it's an amazing series. And even if you've seen the show, which is super hot and amazing, you should also still read the books. So I was really inspired, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to write. I'm going to write a historical romance novel. And so that kind of got me started writing. Like in like the 1700s. And then I thought, I think I want to write a Regency. So then I spent about a year researching the Regency time period. And then I wrote a couple of Regencies and I started publishing through Harlequin Historical for that. And then I thought, medieval sounds really interesting. So I spent about a year researching medieval. And so then I started publishing in medieval. And then, I've always wanted to do historical fiction. And World War II is really my favorite genre in time to read as far as historical fiction goes. And so, interestingly enough, I knew it would be a time-consuming venture. And so I was laid off in 2020, right before the pandemic, because my job just kind of ran out of work. And I talked to my husband about it and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna take my severance and I'm just gonna write full time and I'm gonna write this World War II. And that's the one that hit the New York Times. So obviously, thank God that paid off. So that was really wonderful. And I think the reason why I've enjoyed writing historical fiction so much, because now I'm working on my third book. I just got back from Poland several weeks ago, doing research there for my next book. And I think, and I realize this in hindsight now because of my historical genre hopping and historical romance. I really just love that research aspect of it. And I think that's why I kept jumping around from history, historical era to historical era, because I love just getting to lose myself in history and research, and then letting it all sort of come to life in my head and putting it all on the page.
Yeah, and it's interesting because World War II historical fiction is my favorite as well. And I had a friend who was writing a book on that very subject. And she said, "Do you think people are just tired of World War II and the stories?" And I said, "No. And I don't think they ever will. I don't. Why do you think that is? Why are we so fascinated with that particular? I mean, there's so many fascinating periods of history that I've read about, but we always seem to be drawn to World War II."
I think it's like the darkest time that feels the closest to something that we can connect to. Like for example, I mean, because none of us, we don't know anybody that was alive during the French Resistance, or Revolution. Excuse me. But we people are still alive today who were experienced World War II. And so that makes it feel so much more connected to us. So I think that's part of it. I also think that with it being such an incredibly dark time, then the number of people who came forward and did these brave, heroic acts, oftentimes for people that they didn't even know, it's so incredible when you really think about it. I mean, it's so easy to say, "Oh, I would completely sacrifice myself, no problem." But when you think that you could be putting your children or your parents or your siblings at risk, whatever the case may be, it's such a selfless, completely altruistic act to do, and doing it for the right thing, to save people and really fight the oppressors, and just it's such an incredible time period, and even how people worked around the things that they didn't have to be without everything and still manage to be able to function and continue on with life and also find hope.
Yeah, a good point. And speaking of heroes and the remarkable things that people do, let's get to your book,
Mhm.
The Librarian Spy. Um, Without giving too much away, because we obviously want people to read it and to purchase it. Tell us a little bit about the story. I mean, the title gives a lot away in one sense, but let's hear about the basics.
So, American spies or American librarians were sent over to neutral countries during World War II to gather intel. This could be in the form of underground newspapers, or it could be, publications that the enemies were putting out there, pamphlets, anything that they could get their hands on that could be beneficial. Because you never knew what one thing could imply for something else. For example, and I know this also additional research because of my Warsaw Ghetto research that I'm doing right now. But when the Nazis started to collect all of the furs from the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, they were doing that because they were planning an attack on Russia. So things that wouldn't seem like they would really be a big deal for people to know in America actually could really help give them an idea of upcoming military tactics to prepare for. So that's just kind of an example. So the interesting thing too is when these, I'll back up for a second. 007's Casino Royale, Ian Fleming's. So that actually was based off of his time in Lisbon, Portugal. So that will give you an idea of the level of sort of consummate spies that were all over Lisbon at that time. With it being neutral, you could have a table full of Nazis sitting next to a table full of SOE agents sitting next to a table full of Americans. I mean, everybody was really all mixed up together. And then you had the American librarians, and unfortunately, they really were not given a whole lot of training. They were sort of sent off to the wolves, and and they just kind of had to make do with what they could. So it was, the librarian spy. She wasn't like a super consummate spy. Like she didn't really. It was, and that's what I think actually makes the story so interesting, because there are a lot of stories out there about spies who know exactly what they're doing. They've had all of this training. They know what they're doing. And for me, I loved the idea of this librarian spy coming in, because it would be like me being thrown into being a spy spy, I wouldn't have any idea what I was doing, especially when you take this librarian who came from the Library of Congress, where she's very happy knowing everything that she knows. She's in her comfort zone, and thrown into a place where she's only had a couple weeks worth of research to really, get a chance to familiarize herself with. And there are some old rules that sort of come into play that make her feel a little bit sheepish, if you have to read the book to get to that point.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
she sort of readily agrees to drop everything and do it. I thought, wow. I mean, that was just a whole other generation. But so
oh
how
yeah.
did you come about the true story of these librarian spies, and what could they do specifically to help the resistance movement? I mean, I don't, I still don't quite understand that.
I'm sorry, what was the first part?
What inspired you? How did you first hear about the American Library Spies?
I read an article about it, I think like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And that was what kind of got my brain kind of going with that, especially when I found out that they didn't really have a ton of training to get kind of sent over there to neutral countries. And then as far as with the French Resistance, so that's where the other half of the story takes place. And my heroine with the French Resistance was actually inspired by a real woman who worked with printing presses during World War II with the French Resistance. So Lyon was actually the capital of like literature and everything during the Renaissance time period. So there were tons of people who were willing to write articles, but not a lot of people knew how to do the typography, the engraving, working the printing presses, etc. And so you have these, like, especially not women, but of course all of the men were gone for the most part. So she was able to come in as an apprentice and learn this. And a lot of times when they would do these clandestine presses, they would also include different types of codes. Sometimes in the drawings, they would do it. Sometimes in the articles. So that's why I thought, oh, well, this would be really interesting if she's looking at underground newspapers. This would be a great opportunity for her to have one that comes in from France. And that's how they can connect that way.
Got it. And can you talk a little bit about the research into the book? Because I know you said you just came back from Poland researching your new book, but this is kind of in a, I don't want to say a post-COVID world, but getting there maybe. But what about during the COVID pandemic, when I assume you were in the depths of your research and writing this book?
Yes, and I actually did go to Lyon, France, and Lisbon, Portugal, and Washington, D.C. to the Library of Congress. I had 5 COVID tests. I had 5 PCR tests in the course of 2 months. And interestingly enough, initially, really a more cost-effective way of doing it would be to go to either Portugal or Lyon and then go, to the other place after. And at the time, France opened up, but Portugal was still closed. So I thought, okay, well, let me go on ahead and go to Lyon and do the research there, which actually worked out really well because I wrote both characters' stories completely separate and independent of one another. I had plotted it all out significantly beforehand, so I knew the dates. I knew how everything was going to play out. So I went to Lyon, and then I completely wrote Elaine's perspective, and then fortunately, Portugal opened up, and ironically, right when Portugal opened up, France closed. So I thought, oh, thank goodness that I decided to go on ahead and just go to each individual place. So I went to Portugal, and after I got back from Portugal, about like a week later, which is why I had to do a PCR test to go to the Library of Congress, which they did not check, which made me unhappy. But I got to go to the Library of Congress, and then I came back and I wrote Ava's side. And then I spliced them. I just kind of zippered them together, and I was very, very lucky that they worked out so well because of my serious plotting that I had done beforehand.
And were you able to actually talk to any former American librarian spies?
No, I wasn't able to do that. But when I was in Portugal, one of the things that about Portugal is that a lot of refugees ended up in Portugal because that was sort of the last safe place that they could go to before they were hopefully able to get to America or South America or Canada, somewhere where they could get out of the Nazi occupation. And a lot of times they would leave with just the clothes on their back, and they were stuck in this holding pattern because you unfortunately had a lot of countries who were full. They didn't want to have any more refugees in. Unfortunately, you had like a lot of anti-Semitism, and of course nobody wanted to say, oh, we don't want to let them in because they're Jewish. So a lot of times you just had this ridiculous red tape, and so you had these exit visas and transit visas and all these different kinds of visas. And then you also had to have a boat. It was a very, very complicated process. And these people they were just waiting and waiting and waiting. They couldn't get jobs because in Portugal, Salazar, the dictator, really wanted to make sure that he did maintain neutrality. And so, and he also wanted the people to not resent the fact that the refugees were there. So they weren't allowed to have jobs. And so, a lot of times they were really just stuck in this like sort of like holding pattern. And so that was very, very difficult. And so when I went to Lisbon, my tour guide there actually had a grandmother who was 101 years old, and she remembered all of the refugees coming into Portugal. And so they got to have some conversations, and she remembered so much about it. So my tour guide shared with me, and it was really lovely because it also really opened the door for them to have a conversation that they really hadn't had the opportunity to have before.
And, well, that's why I was kind of surprised that your book took place in Lisbon, Portugal, because, when you think of the resistance movement or the whole war, you think of, mostly the, Germany, Italy, France, England. You don't think of Portugal. And so, was there a large resistance movement there, or do you feel like so much action was there because of the refugee flow?
So there was actually no resistance because there was no war there. It was neutral. So they had this natural asset called tungsten that they would mine from the earth, and that is used for artillery shells, for making certain weapons. And as a result, Salazar, like I said, the dictator, was able to maintain neutrality because he knew that the Germans needed tungsten. He knew that the Allies needed tungsten. And so, he was able to be very, very neutral. And he really did maintain that very well. I know that there was supposed to be an event where they were supposed to at a palace in Sintra, Portugal, where they were supposed to be raising money to buy the Allies a new plane, and he said, "No, you can't do that. We're a neutral country." So he was very, very determined in making sure that there wasn't one side that was being favored or the other. Now, of course, once the tide of battle really started to shift toward the Allies, he saw the way that it was going, and he sided more with the Allies toward the end of the war. But when it was really in the thick of it, he did not have one side or the other that he played for.
Interesting. So I'm curious because you wrote it in a dual narrative, and you talked a little bit about how you wove those stories together, but they're the same timeline, where a lot of dual narratives are different timelines. And so was there a reason you chose to do that? It just worked better for your story, or how do authors determine that?
I mean, it really is dependent on the story. I'm a historical lover. Like, history is my absolute favorite. So I've never really done like the dual narrative with one being more contemporary and one more history, because I want all of mine to be really history. That's just a personal preference because of my affection for history. So, but the reason why I had them both going side by side, if you read the book, you'll actually see that they actually, if you they go through very similar things around the same time. But it's not like, this is just an example. She gets a new pair of shoes, and then she gets a new pair of shoes, and then she gets a dress, and then she gets a dress. It's not obvious, but their lives really do parallel one another significantly.
And I noticed on your website you've got a really great series of blogs on there, and one of them you talked about some of your personal favorite books that you kind of wove into your stories. And can you tell me a little bit about some of your favorite books? And was that intentional, or did it actually flow naturally and you just organically inserted them?
Some of them were just favorite books of mine. Like, for example, I've always loved Little Women, and so I sort of, did a little tilt of my hat to Louisa May Alcott with that. And then other ones, like for example, The Secret Garden, and they'll see it. When if you read the book, then you'll see when The Secret Garden comes up. It really was very like specific for that particular spot. Um, I also do mention Voltaire with Candide, and that's because in Portugal, there was this huge earthquake that took place in 1755. And after it, I mean, it really did destroy a huge part of Portugal. And Portugal is right on the Tagus River. So this huge earthquake caused a tsunami, which wiped out a whole bunch of Portugal as well. And unfortunately, this all took place on All Saints' Day, which meant everybody had their candles lit, which means that if it didn't crumble away or get swept away, it pretty much burned up. And so it was this hugely devastating event in history, and it really did shock the rest of the world. It was estimated at that time that there were hundreds of thousands of deaths in that one day. And now historians estimate that it was still a significant amount of loss of life, but it was more like tens of thousands rather than, and I have no idea where they base this information on. But I do know that, like I said, at the time, they thought it was hundreds of thousands of lives lost in one day. And Voltaire really was just completely reeling over this. He wrote a huge poem that was dedicated to the victims of this earthquake. And he also wrote about it in Candide, which I thought was very interesting because I'd read Candide before. And I had forgotten about that part. And so I went back and I read Candide again while I was writing this book. And I was like, oh, there it is.
I love that about books. You're reading a book and then there's a reference to something else, and you go back and read an old favorite, and then you
Yes.
read something else that you want to learn more about. That's what I love the most about historical fiction, is it just inspires your passion for learning.
Absolutely. Same.
Yeah. And so I know that you talk to book clubs and you're a member of our Novel Network service. So for any of you out there in the audience, whether it's the virtual audience or our social media platforms, our live studio audience, you can go to novelnetwork.com and check out our list of all our authors. I think we have about 150 authors, including Madeline, and you can schedule a book club visit with them. So you can have your own private chat with her on Zoom,
My
you and your book club. Yes, yes. So, and then a reminder that you can come up on stage anytime and ask questions or say hello to Madeline, whatever you'd like. And I see that Debbie just joined us. Debbie, did you have a question or comment for Madeline? Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Welcome, Madeline. It's so good to listen to you. You are fascinating. I just want to tell you that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm about a third of the way through The Librarian Spy, and I'm loving it. I haven't gotten to the point where the two protagonists meet yet. So, but I have a question that's related to your research, and I know you probably get asked all the time about how do you do your historical fiction research, but I want to go even a little bit deeper. I think I wasn't even 20 pages into the book, and it was already rich with so many tidbits from history. I mean, do you just know these things? Or, like, for example, you talk about the Elizabeth Arden Victory Red lipstick, the civilian counterpart to the
Yes.
Montezuma Red servicewoman color. And I thought, well, how do you plot that into your book? Do you just know that, or do you decide I really need to know what color lipstick they wore? I mean, those are little pieces, but they make it so richly real and alive to the time, I think. And same thing you did with like the cherry blossom trees in DC and talked about that. I mean, just all those little pieces. That's not like the big broad stroke of everybody knows, the general story of World War II, but those things that make that era alive and real. Do you just start writing and then say, I think she should be wearing lipstick, what color should it be? And then how do you research that?
Well, first of all, I just have to say that it absolutely warms my heart that you notice all those little things, because that's one of the things I love. One of the things I love so much about writing historical fiction is really learning all of these amazing things and finding little ways to sort of splice them into the novel. I do a crazy amount of research, and this particular book was quite a bite because I had America and Portugal and France, and so I did a lot of research. I mean, I probably, for each book that I write, I probably have about 120 nonfiction novels or nonfiction books that I will read through to try to find different information. I read a lot of firsthand accounts, and believe it or not, firsthand accounts a lot of times is where you get a lot of those little details. People will talk about, stop by the store today to pick up blah blah blah, or I used this day 13 coupon to buy a new pair of shoes, or whatever the case may be. And so while I'm doing my research, I keep a little section in the back of because I handwrite everything that I read, that I'm like, oh, I want to remember that, so I handwrite it into my notebooks. And I have a little section in the back that I keep track of verbiage that was used back then, acronyms that may have been used back then, specific details that you might see on the street, or scents that people kind of mention that they smell, or specific little items like the red lipstick. And those are the sort of little sensory things that I'll make sure to make a note of, because I'm a huge reader of historical fiction. And for me, I love finding little details like that, because it makes you feel like you're right there when you're reading, or right in the character's shoes while you're reading it. That you purchase with your J13 coupons, and so for me, I absolutely love that with historical fiction. So I truly appreciate that you noticed all those little details that I add in, because I work really hard to get them.
And it's appreciated, I have to tell you. I love historical fiction, and I think World War II is one of my favorite areas of history too. And just there are a lot of good books out there, but I just really appreciate the richness that you give to the descriptions just by making it so real. And it's just really weird, because I've never read anything about the Lisbon or Portugal part of World War II, like Susan was saying. And I literally just finished a book by Chris Pavone called Two Nights in Lisbon. And then I pick yours up and I'm like, oh, it's in Lisbon. How weird. And I haven't read anything.
Oh, that's so
So
funny.
yeah. And then one last thing, I'm sorry, I don't want to hog your time, but I'm super excited because I see that in the audience are two of the authors that are also going to be speaking later in this series, which I'm really looking forward to, Gill Paul and Ellen Meeropol. So I just wanted to say hello to them. I'm fans and I look forward to reading their books. And I think Gill's up at like midnight because I think she's in London or something like that. So this is so cool. It's like having all of you guys in one room together to chat. I'm honored. So thank you so much. And I'll get off the stage now.
Oh, thank you so much, Debbie. And thank you guys so much for coming too.
Thank you, Debbie, for your question and your enthusiasm. I agree. And I think that's why, people talk about how long it takes to write historical fiction, because when it's well done, you do that thorough research and no detail is left out, and it takes time to figure that all out. So, and I see that Anissa has joined us on stage. Anissa, I'm going to try to get you on camera so we can see you too. So give me a minute. Invite you to video. You'll have to accept. And then I know Debbie specifically asked me not to put her on camera, so I wasn't slighting her. But welcome, Anissa. Oh, are you there? Oh, you're muted. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, it unmuted me. You no need to come on camera. I've been at school for 4 days, and Susan, you'll be happy to know that Madeline and I have met. I know you like to know who I've met. Madeline came to
I think
Greenville
you've
a
met
couple weeks
everybody now,
ago.
haven't you? You make the rounds now, Anissa. I'm very impressed.
They all come to me pretty much now. I tell them Judson who I want, and they come for the most part.
And it was so great getting to finally meet you too. So thank you so much for coming.
It was a fun night, very fun night. But my question, Madeline, Debbie touched a little bit on what I was thinking about, but I'm just curious, and I don't think this was asked of them Judson the other day, other than although those two ladies asked you every question that they could have asked. They told us later. They told us later that they told us later they had slipped a couple extra drinks, so I think that's what the problem was.
Anyways, I had answers for everything.
It was funny. So I know you wrote 30-some romance novels, and you've done the 2 historical. Was part of your reason in moving from the romance to the historical, was that because you wanted to do the research?
Yes.
That was what I thought.
I love the research.
You nailed it, Anissa.
I get so excited about it. And, when I buy a whole bunch of books, it's funny because a lot of the books that I use are out of print. which you have to worry, you have to be careful with that sometimes. Like, for example, right now I'm doing Portugal, or I'm doing Poland, and I have to be careful if it was printed in Poland before 1990, it's going to have some censored material because it was really under the Russian communist occupation then. So it's interesting with getting out of print books, but a lot of times I'll order, I'll try to order as much as I can from independent bookstores, but I do a lot of like Abe books as well, these older books. And so they take a while to trickle in, and it's like every day is like Christmas getting these books. And some of them, oh my gosh, I have this one that I just got for Poland that was published in 1945 in London, and it smells amazing. I opened it up and I was like, old book. so yeah.
That was my suspicion, but I just wanted to verify it. And I have enjoyed both of your historicals tremendously. And you as a reader, you can definitely tell how much you enjoy research and how well you put it into the books that you write.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Anissa. Nice to hear from you again. So I know we've got a little time left, so I want to remind anybody in the audience, anybody else who hasn't asked a question or just to come up and say hi, you're welcome to do that. Don't be shy. It's one of the benefits of Fireside, which I love. But before we close out talking about The Librarian's Spy, which, as a reminder, you can order your signed copy at adventuresbythebook.com if you haven't already done so. Any final thoughts about that book that we haven't talked about? Any points that we haven't made that you'd like to share?
No, I mean, really just the main thing is just that I really do want people to come away really appreciating so much what the refugees really did go through in Lisbon, in Portugal, because it seems like they were safe, they were safe. They escaped Nazi occupation. But, it was really a very like sort of tenuous safety where you didn't know if the Nazis did decide to attack Portugal, for example, they would end up right exactly where they were to start with. And then you also had the PVDE, which was the Portuguese secret police that they had to check in with on a monthly basis. And if any of your visas expired, you could be subject to arrest. And the Gestapo actually trained the PVDE. So, as the people, like when I was reading through firsthand accounts, the Portuguese people were so incredibly welcoming and loving. There really wasn't an issue with anti-Semitism. Everybody was really just like I said, very welcoming. Like people would be walking to their job and they would give their lunch to people who didn't have anything to eat. I mean, it was very giving. And as kind and generous as the Portuguese were, unfortunately, the PVDE were quite cruel. And so, they were very, very scared. Refugees were incredibly scared of the PVDE coming after them and arresting them once they lost all of their visas. So, like I said, even though it seems like they were lucky to have escaped, it was a very, very like shaky sort of safety. So I really want people to come away really appreciating so much, because I feel like there's not a lot of discussion often about the refugees and where they end up, and there's a lot about what they're going through during persecution, but not necessarily after the fact or in the interim on the way to where they could be going.
Yeah, and I also like to ask authors what they want readers to get out of their book. So is that the main point for you, is what you want readers to get out of this book?
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of things, but definitely yes, that for sure.
Yeah, and I know you kind of enticed us with your next book in Poland, and I see you have a placeholder on your website for it, The Keeper of Hidden Books, which is the current title. I'm going to celebrate that. So curious what you can tell us about that.
So, The Keeper of Hidden Books, it takes place in Warsaw, Poland. It's about two best friends, one who is Jewish and is forced into the ghetto, and then one who remains on the Polish side. And I'm still in the process of writing it. I actually was writing it, and then I found a piece of research that I've been looking for 9 months for, and it has completely shifted my entire plot. So I've actually spent the last week and a half redoing my entire plot, asking for an extension on my manuscript, and pretty much rewriting the entire thing. So wish me luck with that. So I can't talk too much about it because it's still very much in the construction phase. But it's on Goodreads if anybody wants to add it to their Goodreads. It has no cover. It has no blurb. I know that's super not very enticing, but I do have a little review that I've kind of started where I'm sort of filling in updates. It doesn't have a ranking or anything, but it's just sort of little comments, and people can always ask questions on there too if they want to, and I can try to answer them as well as I can in these sort of crazy stage of my plotting / writing.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I know that it's really hard in the writing profession to kind of raise awareness about your book, especially in a COVID world. And so authors really appreciate when readers take the time to go on there and follow them on Goodreads or Amazon, write a blurb, add it to their to be read list. And, you don't need to know a lot about what she's writing about, but you know that she writes historical fiction. She's an incredible writer. She does meticulous research. She's a New York Times International bestselling author. She's charming and personable to meet with a book club. That's all you need to know to go on there and add it to your to be read list. And it goes a long way in, helping with her relationship with readers and publishers to get word out about her books. So if you read this book, The Librarian Spy, or if you've read any of her other books, take just a few minutes. And even if you just go on and give it, 4 or 5 stars and just say a few words, I love this book. You don't have to be an incredibly insightful, like write a whole, paragraph on it, but do that. And I know Madeline and all authors appreciate that.
Much. Thank you very much for mentioning that, Susan. We definitely do.
Yeah. And where can people find you? Social media, where are you at?
So they can always go to my website, madelinemartin.com. That has all of my social media on there as well. And then I think Facebook is Madeline Martin Author. And I know that Instagram and Twitter is at Madeline M. Martin, because Madeline Martin beat me to the punch.
Oh, darn her.
I know. I even tried to chat up and be friends with her and stuff, and she was like, nothing. Not interested.
And also, you can find her on Fireside now. So you can click on her icon, follow her, and anytime she comes on Fireside, and I do hope she comes back, then you will get a notice that she's on there. You can also follow me on Fireside by clipping on my icon and hit follow. In that way, whenever we're doing an author interview, which is basically weekly, you'll get notice of it. In fact, this is part 2 of a 6-part series, as I mentioned. Next week, we're going to be talking with author Jamie Beck. We're going to go a little lighter fare, not World War II, Take It From Me, a family story, which you'll really enjoy. And then also in our audience is Ellen Meeropol and Gill Paul, and future episodes we'll be talking to them. I was hoping they'd join us on stage, but I think they're being shy and just kind of taking notes. So, but we're glad you're here, ladies, and we look forward to chatting with you. I know a lot of times in our audience we have aspiring writers, and I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom that you could share with aspiring writers that you've learned along the way of your 35 some odd books.
I think really just the most important thing is it's hard sometimes to not look at other authors and compare yourself, but really the most important thing is just to kind of keep your head down and focus on your specific path. Obviously, like I said, it took 35 books from mine to really ever hit the New York Times, and really have the incredible success that it had. And if I had been comparing myself to other authors in the very beginning, I don't know if I would have ever really had the determination to stay in there for that long. So, and I now being a full-time writer, I mean, it is like a dream come true. I mean, even when I was a little girl, I never said, oh, I want to be a writer when I grow up, even though I really did, because it felt like I want to be an astronaut, or, I want to be a movie star. It felt so completely unattainable. So, so being able to be a full-time author, it's such an incredible dream come true. So just keep your head down and stay focused on your path, and just be the best author that you can possibly be.
great advice. Thank you. And I always like to imagine when I'm chatting with an author, what kind of adventure by the book would I want to do with them? I'm sensing a trip to Portugal, a trip to Poland. I don't know. It would be really
Definitely
fun.
some travel for sure. I love to travel, so.
Me too. Me too. And it's been a long time with
That
this
military
COVID
brat in us. We
crisis.
can't help ourselves.
Exactly. So, one last call because we've run out of time. For anybody in the audience who wants to come up, say hi, ask a question. You're going to lose your chance if you don't do so now. But we will be back. We will be back on August 25th for part 3 with author Jamie Beck, who is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author. And then future episodes with Ellen Meeropol, Gill Paul. So if you want to hear more from Madeline, follow her on all her social media, on Fireside. Any last words before we close out, Madeline?
Oh, just thank you so much to everyone for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Susan, for organizing all of this.
It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you, Anissa. It's very catchy, isn't it? So until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Madeline. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.